thank you for joining episode 7 of our Overshadowed series, discussing how modern IT and security teams are dealing with the risks of shadow IT. I'm Russ Spitler, CEO and co-founder of Nudge Security, and with me today is Mario Duarte, VP of Security for Snowflake. Mario has over 20 years of experience as a security professional, building and managing teams in the tech, retail, and healthcare and financial sectors, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Welcome, Mario.
Thank you, Russell. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
So we've been certainly hearing a lot about the risks of AI, and there are plenty, but today we're going to pivot that conversation slightly and focus on how IT and security leaders can use the attention being paid to AI risks to transform their IT governance strategies. So I think it's fair to say that there's never been a category of productivity tools that has garnered as much attention as generative AI has from boards, executives, and others when it comes to managing risk. Would you agree?
I would agree to an extent. I would say I've been around the block a few times now, and I think back in the mid 2000s or late 2000s, the cloud and moving to the cloud generated a lot of attention. I wouldn't say as equal as this Gen I, so I'll grant you that, but it did generate a lot of attention. But again, I do agree Gen I has and AI is generating a lot.
It's kind of interesting when you bring up the cloud, because as I see the contrast between the two of those, generative AI is something that's easy to dip your toe in the water, and it's something to start using at scale and relatively little effort. Whereas when we were back in the day in the cloud, lifting and shifting a data center or putting a new workload up, especially in the early days of AWS, was kind of a non-trivial transition. And so I think those dynamics have also shifted. Sort of like the rate of adoption or the barriers to adoption are a lot easier than the early days of the cloud, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the friction, there's always, when you were on-prem, there was always a physical aspect of being on-prem. Even if you were running VMware, you needed to, if you were managing your own data centers, you would have to put in this physical hardware as you ran out of space or ran out of CPU and memory. So there was that physicality aspect and kind of slow things down. As we moved more into the cloud, things became even less friction. And with Gen AI, it's even less friction. So it's super fast, supercharged.
Especially when you put it in that context and think about the other SaaS services that are out there, there's a lot of the same concerns that you have as it relates to generative AI as you might have with, a new spreadsheet application, a new marketing contact, targeting platform, something along those lines. The data privacy, data governance, compliance are the same. Would you agree? Where are the risks the same, and where are they different in your view?
Well, their employees have the ability to sign up to a lot of these SaaS applications. So, okay, let's think about it. Unless you live in a moat, a fortress, where you do not allow your employees to have the ability to go out to the public internet and interact with the public internet. And there are companies that are more, they do have those models. I won't go into them, but generally speaking, companies are allowing their employees to engage with new tooling, new SaaS applications, new services to improve productivity. The problem is you get into this whole shadow IT. I guess that's just what we're talking about, quite honestly, right? And there are things that, because we're allowing employees, but we lack the visibility to see what services they're using on the internet, on the cloud specifically. And how to safeguard that data. What is the data? What is the service that they're using? And what data they're bringing in or taking out from the company into these services? Now imagine supercharging this problem with the AI, advent of AI, and it becomes a lot more daunting, quite honestly. Companies are struggling.
I think that's an interesting piece of the puzzle, which is certainly for years we've been uploading data sets into these services with varying degrees of oversight and governance as it relates to the use of those services. However, at least in my experience, my conversations with other security leaders, it's rare that a board member might come in and say, hey, who's using Airtable in my organization? However, these days with the amount of hype that's going on around OpenAI, I do know that board members have asked, hey, who's using ChatGPT and does it impact us? Is that the same as your experiences?
We're seeing it. I'm seeing it certainly from our own board, but not just our board. But I like many security professionals. We have these tribes that we belong to, either in Slack or we meet on a regular basis. And this is a topic that you're hearing about in the last 2 quarters, and it's just increasing. I would argue that not to highlight Microsoft situation that happened a couple of days ago, but that security incident where they exposed more data than they should through one of their AI services internally, that is, it's just going to just resonate more loudly. And if you're a public company, so there's a couple other things going on, Russell. It's like the perfect timing, quite honestly, in a wrong way. One, we have this low friction solution that's really productive, Gen AI. Two, we are increasing regulations and governments are getting more involved everywhere because they want to protect the customer's privacy or the employee's privacy. It makes sense. But regulations like the SEC later this year is going to take effect, and anything material, if you're a public company, you need to highlight it and be very transparent about it. All of these things are creating the right conditions for errors to occur, quite honestly.
I like the way you're putting that, right? We have this increasingly complex data footprint across the internet and an increasingly complex set of regulations that have teeth these days in terms of what responsibilities we have for that data, regardless of our sort of more traditional security governance responsibilities. Now there are other organizations and departments who are worried about the impact of that.
And it's not just your customers' data. Even if you're doing some services on behalf of your clients, your employees' rights, right? Your employees' data that you're also safeguarding, that also comes into play as well.
And I'm not going to be able to do the right attribution on this quote, but you never want to let a crisis go to waste. And as we kind of think about this increased environmental complexity, as well as the increased awareness that has spurned from the generative AI sort of hype, where do you see the best advantage for technology leaders to kind of take advantage of this increase in attention, and how can they move forward in a way that allows them to do some things that perhaps they wanted to do for a few years?
Correct. Yeah. You have to start first with visibility. You cannot solve this problem or provide guidelines or improve your overall security program without having the right visibility. Okay. And if you think about, again, think of these open AI systems out there on the public internet that your employees may be using. You can no longer put your head in the sand and say, well, I'm not seeing it. I can't see it. I don't have the tooling to do that because, well, maybe we're not using proxies, etc. As an example, we don't have that luxury. We never had it. We certainly don't have it now, especially with the regulatory temperature changing on us. Companies must have visibility into this problem first. Figuring out, we call it a shadow IT for lack of a better term. One needs to have these visibility in how our employees are interacting these services, and certainly making a connection to potentially the data that they're accessing internally. Armed with that, we need to present a story, a solution. It might take a quarter, multiple quarters, a day, who knows, but a journey to have better governance of the data that we're holding internally.
It's absolutely the right step. Again, not the topic of conversation for today, but when I started Nudge and talking about SaaS with almost every, and I think you were one of the conversations I had, almost every security leader came back with that. Step 0 is understanding what's out there and understanding who's using it. Yeah. And that's a critical first step for anyone to take. And frankly, a very reasonable response when you come back to the board. Who's using ChatGPT? What's the threat to my organization? Well, here are the 50 users who are using it, and here are the ones we've talked to, and here's the ones we haven't. And we have some context for having that risk-based discussion from that point forward.
Correct. I think, as a follow-up, people will, here's if you could create a kind of a generic statement. what I'm seeing with other companies do, and we certainly do something similar, is you first find out about this new services, new technology that is empowering your organization. So you have to write, but you have to write the policies, the new procedures on how to interact, how do you safeguard, how to create the right guardrails to do your job, be productive, but also, maintain privacy for your employees, for your customers, etc. Okay, now you create a policy, you train your employees, or you add this policy to an existing policy. I want to say, when I first started at Snowflake, I try to really have a policy that was very short, 2 pages. Why? Because human beings struggle with anything more than 10 pages. And I look now, 9 years later, and that policy has grown and it keeps growing. Now we throw stuff like this new service, new Gen AI, and we expect our employees to read it, to become experts at it. And the reality of it is that it's really important to be able to interact with the employee programmatically, to educate them as they're doing something that potentially violates the policy. If people are not going to remember that policy, just remembering I read it. Maybe some people can, maybe they have photographic memory, but the vast majority of us don't. And so we need a system, a service, a way to engage the employee as they're interacting with these services, and I hate to use the word nudge, but nudge them in, hey, there's a new policy, you're not supposed to be doing that, etc. And or here's the right way of using these technologies. That is really important.
I think you're hitting on one of my favorite topics, which is awareness versus behavioral change, right? We aren't going to change behaviors just through awareness. And my classic example is I'm aware that Diet Coke is bad for me, but I still find myself ordering Diet Cokes every once in a while, right? That behavior needs to change, not increased awareness. And that's very much the same when you think about your 10-page policy versus what are my day-to-day actions? What am I trying to get done? And particularly since those are often driven out of, a need for productivity or efficiency or some challenge that they're trying to solve for the business.
Right. So I think first you highlight, you need visibility, you need the policy to create governance, but you also need a programmatic way to connect both of those things and constantly help the employee to learn to learn how to interact with these services securely. And you need to have that. So visibility, policy, and real-time education, constant education of the employee are going to really be the only way, in my opinion, that you're going to have an educated, well-informed employee base.
And that very much leads into my belief that a strong security culture, which I think is comprised of those elements that you just described, is really the only way forward for larger organizations to get a handle on security, or smaller organizations for that matter as well.
Yeah. I think you need to, at the same time, we need to provide, learn the visibility, understand how the employees are using these services that you might have not been aware of, and then provide them with a approved version of these services, one where we can put more governance, more control, more visibility. But regardless, we will need to arm our employees with the right services and tools that adhere to our security posture for a company.
It's to abstract that a little bit, it's understand, contain, and embrace or redirect, right? Which is absolutely the challenge with any emergent technology. But as you sort of remarked, also the challenge across sort of all the services we gather through the your browser, right? I mean, these are all kind of have the same variations, the same concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If you're a security practitioner, what do you do? Okay, so you get you start collecting all this data of how your employees are interacting with X, but that requires a security analyst. This stuff doesn't magically happen, right? Internally, you have to go and write the searches, go look at a particular URL and say, well, is this bad or is this good? So I would argue that invariably you're going to fail if you try to do this on your own. And there are companies out there, you want to leverage companies who can actually accelerate your visibility. I keep mentioning visibility. It is the number one thing you need to think about. And partnering up with the right company, the right vendors, to accelerate that I think is where we need to put our energy as security practitioners. So, if you try to do it on your own, okay, good luck. Maybe you'll be better than most companies out there. So good luck. Otherwise, go look for companies who are really thinking about this space well. You know,
I think that's always an interesting challenge, and I always sort of think about it as, what is the core competence of my company, and where do I buy the core competence of somebody else's company, right? And those two challenges are hard to come to the truth on. But you heard it from VP of Security of a data analytics company, right? So I think that's interesting perspective and context. Well, as you embark on this sort of shift in the world out there, what's the most important to convey to your board and other non-IT stakeholders as you kind of think about the efforts that you're taking to handle this sort of emergent?
Newer technologies generally create this buzz. I mean, it's natural. When the turn of the century, 100 many years ago, not everybody was using electricity, and it like once we started introducing electricity, it became a game changer. And those companies, trust me, there were some companies out there, some people that, no, I don't want to do electricity. I want to stick to the true and tried method of gas and fire, and that's how we're going to light up things. And well, those are dinosaurs. They're not around as often, or even around anymore. So we have to embrace change, and I would argue, look, you're in the technology space, you're in the security space. You didn't get in an industry because you didn't want to embrace change. So change is important, and you have to embrace it and leverage it. One, for your career, but also for the company, to also to advance your company against your competitors. So to me, it's just embrace it.
I think that's absolutely fair, as the ones who embrace it and the ones who are left behind. And I think we saw that as you came up with the first example with the public cloud. And now I think that's probably true with this kind of next wave of technology. Well, we could really go on for hours about this topic, but it's time for us to wrap up today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Mario, for being our guest. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Talk to you later.
Stay tuned for future episodes of Overshadowed, and hope you can join us again soon.